I need to tell you something that happened to me just a few days ago. Something that's going to sound impossible, maybe even crazy, but I'm asking you to hear me out because what I experienced has left me with a message that I can't keep to myself. My name is John Clark, and I'm a pastor, or I was a pastor. I don't know. Things feel different now after what happened. I've spent 23 years in ministry, preaching every Sunday, counseling families, performing baptisms and weddings and funerals. I thought I understood faith, thought I had a handle on what God wanted from His people. Turns out I didn't know much at all. October 12th started like any other Saturday. I was in my study at the church working on my sermon for the next day. The building was empty, just me in the silence. I remember feeling tired, sort of worn down from everything happening in the world. The news had been heavy lately. People were anxious, and honestly, I was struggling to find the right words to offer them hope. I'd been praying for guidance, asking God to show me what His people needed to hear in these times. Be careful what you pray for, I guess. Around 3:00 in the afternoon, I started feeling strange. Not sick exactly, but off. My chest felt tight, sort of heavy, and my left arm had this weird tingling sensation. I'm 56 years old, not exactly in peak physical condition, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew what was probably happening. But I kept thinking maybe it was just stress. Maybe I needed to eat something. Maybe if I just sat down for a minute, it would pass. Denial is a powerful thing. I made it to the couch in my office before everything went sideways. The pain hit me like a freight train. This crushing pressure that made it impossible to breathe. I tried to call out, but no sound came. Tried to reach for my phone, but my arm wouldn't cooperate. And then I was falling, or the room was spinning, or both. The last thing I remember thinking was that this was a really stupid way to die alone in my office on a Saturday afternoon when I still hadn't finished my sermon. Then I wasn't in my office anymore. The pain was gone, just completely gone, and I was standing in this space that I can't really describe properly because it didn't follow normal rules. There was light everywhere, but not from any source I could identify. It wasn't harsh or blinding, more like the light was just part of the air itself, warm and alive, and somehow full of love. I looked down at my hands, and they looked solid enough, but I knew I wasn't in my body anymore. Knew it with absolute certainty, even though I couldn't explain how I knew. That's when I saw Him. Jesus was standing there maybe 10 ft away, and I recognized Him immediately, even though He didn't look like any painting or statue I'd ever seen. His presence was overwhelming, not in a frightening way, but in a way that made me aware of every single thing I'd ever done wrong in my entire life. Every harsh word, every selfish thought, every time I'd chosen comfort over obedience, all of it was just there, visible somehow, and I felt this crushing shame that should have destroyed me. But at the same time, I felt completely loved, completely accepted, and that combination was almost too much to handle. "John," He said, and His voice was inside me and around me and through me all at once. "You've been asking for guidance. You've been praying to know what to tell my people. I'm going to show you, but what you see will be difficult, and what you learn will challenge everything you think you understand about the times ahead." I wanted to say something, wanted to ask questions, but I couldn't form words. Maybe I didn't have a voice in this place. Or maybe I was just too overwhelmed to use it. Jesus reached out and touched my forehead, and suddenly we weren't in that space of light anymore. We were somewhere else entirely, watching scenes unfold, like we were looking through a window into the future. The first thing he showed me was the mark. I'd preached about it before, about the mark of the beast from Revelation. But I'd always treated it sort of theoretically, like it was something distant and symbolic. What Jesus showed me was immediate and real and terrifying. I saw a world where this technology had become mandatory, where you literally could not buy food or access your bank account or even enter most buildings without it. The mark itself looked innocent enough, just a small implant under the skin, barely visible. People were lining up to get it, relieved even, because it solved so many problems. No more lost credit cards, no more identity theft. Everything you needed right there under your skin. But Jesus showed me what was really happening when people accepted it. I saw the spiritual reality behind the physical act, and it was horrifying. Each time someone willingly took the mark, something fundamental changed in them. Not immediately obvious, not dramatic, but definite. Like a door closing in their soul, a connection being severed that could never be restored. And the worst part was that most of them had no idea what they were giving up. They thought it was just convenient technology, just the next logical step in human progress. Watch what happens to those who refuse, Jesus said. His voice was heavy with sorrow, but also with a strange kind of pride, maybe like he was sad about what was coming, but honored by those who would stand firm. The scene shifted, and I saw believers, real followers of Christ, who had understood the spiritual implications and rejected the mark. The consequences were immediate and harsh. They couldn't work their jobs anymore, couldn't buy groceries. Their bank accounts were frozen, some lost their homes. I watched families torn apart over this decision, parents choosing differently than their children, spouses divided against each other. The pressure was immense, not just from the government or the economic system, but from other Christians who had convinced themselves that taking the mark was acceptable, that it was just an external thing that didn't affect the soul. These false teachers, Jesus said, and I could hear anger in his voice now, actual anger. They will lead many astray with smooth words and logical arguments. They will say that I care only about the heart, that external compliance doesn't matter, but the mark is not merely external. It is a choice of worship, a declaration of allegiance. Those who take it are choosing the system of this world over dependence on me. I saw communities of believers living in hiding, meeting in homes and forests and abandoned buildings. They looked worn and tired, their clothes shabby, their faces marked by hardship, but there was something else in their faces, too. Something I'd rarely seen in my comfortable suburban congregation. A kind of joy that made no sense given their circumstances. A peace that shouldn't have been possible. And I saw miracles happening among them, small ones mostly, not the flashy kind, food lasting longer than it should, water found in unlikely places, healing without medicine, provision appearing exactly when it was needed and not a moment before. This is how I will care for those who trust me completely. Jesus explained, just as I fed Israel in the wilderness, just as I provided for Elijah through ravens, I will provide for these. But they must learn to depend on me alone, not on the systems of this world. Their faith will become their currency, their trust, their sustenance. I watched them gather in what used to be someone's basement, maybe 15 or 20 people packed into this cramped space. with concrete walls and one small window near the ceiling that they'd covered with black fabric. They were singing, but quietly, so quietly you could barely hear them from outside, probably. Their voices were tired, and some of them were off-key, but there was something in the way they sang that made my chest ache. Like they meant every word in a way I'd never meant anything in my comfortable church back home, with the padded seats and the professional worship band and the coffee bar in the lobby. Jesus didn't say anything for a while, just let me watch, and I saw this woman, probably in her 60s, with grey hair pulled back in a bun and hands that looked like they'd worked hard their whole life. She was leading the worship, if you could call it that. No instruments, no microphone, just her voice starting each song and the others joining in. And between songs she would pray these simple prayers, asking God for daily bread, literally daily bread, and for protection, and for strength. Keep going. Nothing fancy or theological, just honest, raw maybe. Then I saw them sharing food after the worship ended. One family had brought potatoes, another had some kind of grain, someone else had managed to get vegetables somehow. They pulled it all together and made this thin soup that probably wouldn't have satisfied anyone, but they ate it like it was a feast, thanking God for it. Actually thanking Him, and I realized these people had nothing, basically nothing, but they had something I'd never had in all my years of having everything, this joy that didn't make sense, this peace that shouldn't have existed given their situation. Look at their faces, Jesus said finally. Do you see fear? Do you see despair? I looked closer and no, I didn't. Worry, sure, exhaustion. Definitely, but not despair. Not that hollow emptiness I'd seen in the faces of people who'd taken the mark and realized too late what they'd done. These people were alive in a way those others weren't. Their eyes were clear, focused, present, like they could see something the rest of the world couldn't see anymore. The scene shifted, and I was somewhere else, watching a different group. This one was younger, mostly people in their 20s and 30s. Meeting in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. They had set up a kind of makeshift school for their children because the kids couldn't go to regular schools without the mark. A young man, who couldn't have been more than 25, was teaching from a Bible that looked like it had been read 1,000 times, pages falling out, held together with tape. The children sat on the floor listening to him explain how God had provided manna in the wilderness, how He'd never abandoned His people even when things looked impossible. And one of the kids, this little girl, maybe 7 years old, raised her hand and asked if God would do that for them too. Would He make food appear like He did for the Israelites? The young teacher paused, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. He said, maybe not exactly like that. Not manna falling from the sky probably, but yes, God would provide. He always had so far. Every time they thought they were out of food, something would happen. Someone would find supplies, or another believer would share what they had, or they'd discover food in a place they'd already searched and somehow missed before. The little girl seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to listening. But I kept thinking about what the teacher had said. Every time they thought they were out of food, something would happen. Not before they got desperate, not when they still had plenty, but right when they needed it most. Provision would come. That's how it works, Jesus said, and I realized he'd been reading my thoughts. I don't give my children everything they want in advance. I teach them to depend on me day by day, hour by hour sometimes. This is how their faith grows strong. This is how they learn that I am enough. I watched these communities for what felt like hours, but might have been seconds. Time didn't work normally in this vision. I saw believers finding creative ways to survive outside the system. bartering with each other, growing food in hidden gardens, fixing broken things instead of buying new ones, learning skills their grandparents knew but their generation had forgotten, how to preserve food without refrigeration, how to make medicine from plants, how to build and repair with their hands. They were going backward in some ways, giving up all the convenience and technology that defined modern life. But they were going forward too, rediscovering something essential that had been lost. Jesus showed me a man who had been a software engineer before everything changed. He'd made good money, lived in a nice house, drove a nice car. Now he was living in a rural area, working with his hands to grow food, his expensive education seemingly worthless. But I watched him teaching younger believers how to think critically, how to solve problems, how to use their minds for more than consuming entertainment. His education wasn't wasted. It was just being used differently than he'd planned. And I saw a woman who had been a doctor, a surgeon, actually one of those prestigious careers that people spend decades building. She couldn't practice anymore without the mark, couldn't access the hospitals or the medical equipment or any of it. But she was using her knowledge to help her community, teaching them basic first aid and hygiene, treating injuries and illnesses with limited supplies and a lot of prayer. I watched her set a broken bone using materials that would have made her professors at medical school horrified, but she did it with skill and confidence, and the bone healed properly. She was still a doctor, still serving, just in ways she never imagined. "These are my physicians," Jesus said. "These are my teachers, my builders, my leaders. The world system has rejected them, but I have not. Every skill, every talent, every bit of knowledge they possess, I will use for my purposes. Nothing is wasted in my kingdom." The vision shifted again, and this time I saw something that made me uncomfortable. I watched believers being arrested, dragged away from their hiding places by authorities who'd finally found them. Some went quietly, others had to be forced. Their communities watched helplessly as their brothers and sisters were taken away. And I wanted to ask Jesus why he let this happen, why he didn't protect them. But before I could form the question, he showed me what happened next. The believers who were arrested didn't recant. They didn't deny their faith or agree to take the mark, even when faced with imprisonment or worse. And their courage, their absolute refusal to compromise, it did something to the people who witnessed it. Guards who were just doing their jobs started questioning what they were doing. Officials who'd been enforcing the system without thinking began to wonder if maybe they were on the wrong side. I saw seeds of doubt being planted in hearts that had been hardened, small cracks appearing in the facade of certainty that held the whole system together. "Some will be called to suffer publicly," Jesus explained. "Their witness will reach people that quiet resistance cannot reach. Do not think I have abandoned them when they are arrested or persecuted. I am with them in their suffering, and their testimony will bear fruit they cannot see." I watched one man in particular, a pastor maybe, standing before some kind of tribunal or court. They offered him one last chance to take the mark, to renounce his foolish resistance and rejoin society. He could have his life back, his family, his freedom. All he had to do was accept this simple technology, this practical solution. The man looked at his accusers, and I could see he was terrified, actually shaking with fear. But he said no, said he'd rather die than betray his Lord. And something happened in that courtroom that I don't think anyone expected. One of the judges, this older woman who'd probably sentenced dozens of believers before him, she started crying right there on the bench, tears running down her face. She asked him why. Why would he throw his life away for an invisible God? Why choose suffering when comfort was being offered? And the pastor, still shaking, still clearly terrified, told her that Jesus was more real to him than anything in this world, that he'd experienced God's love and presence in ways that made everything else pale in comparison, that giving up eternal life for temporary comfort wasn't a trade he could make, not for any price. The woman didn't let him go. She couldn't probably, even if she wanted to. The system was bigger than her individual choices. But I saw something change in her face, in her eyes, a question that hadn't been there before, a crack in her certainty. And I understood that this was the fruit Jesus had mentioned. This pastor might not ever know what his testimony did in that moment, but it mattered. It counted for something in ways that would ripple outward beyond what anyone could measure. Jesus showed me more scenes like this. Believers standing firm in small moments and large ones, their faithfulness creating impacts they couldn't see. A teenager refusing the mark, even though it meant giving up college and the future she'd planned. A mother choosing to keep her children unmarked, even though it meant they'd face hardship. An elderly man who'd lived through easier times, refusing to compromise in his final years. Each choice mattered. Each act of faithfulness sent ripples through the spiritual realm that affected things in the physical world. Then the vision shifted to something stranger, harder to describe. Jesus showed me the prayers of these faithful believers, and they looked like light, actual visible light, rising up toward heaven. Not metaphorical light, but real tangible streams of brightness that cut through the darkness surrounding the earth. And these prayers were powerful, more powerful than I'd ever imagined prayers could be. They were creating shields around communities, confusing the enemies of God's people, opening doors that should have been locked, closing doors that should have been open. This is what the enemy fears most, Jesus said. Not physical resistance, not political movements, not anything that operates in the realm of flesh and power. He fears the prayers of my faithful ones, because prayer operates in the realm of spirit, where he has already been defeated. When my people pray in faith, mountains move, circumstances change, impossible things become possible. I watched as one community's prayers literally turned away. A group of soldiers who'd been sent to arrest them. The soldiers just got confused, couldn't remember where they were going, ended up searching the wrong area entirely. And another community's prayers provided food when their supplies ran out. A delivery truck broke down right near their location. And the driver, feeling generous or maybe prompted by something he didn't understand, gave them cases of food that were supposed to go elsewhere. Miracles, but quiet ones. Provision that looked almost natural until you realized how impossibly perfect the timing was. Jesus was showing me that prayer wasn't just words floating up into nothing. Prayer was action, real action, maybe more real than anything happening in the physical world, honestly. Because when believers prayed in faith, when they really prayed believing God would answer, things changed. Not always in obvious ways, not always in ways you'd expect, but things changed. The spiritual realm responded, and that response filtered down into the physical world, in ways that looked like coincidence or luck or just random chance, but weren't random at all. I watched as prayers created confusion among the enemies of God's people. Soldiers would show up to raid a house where believers were hiding, and suddenly they'd get orders to go somewhere else instead. Or they'd forget why they came, or the technology they were using to track people would malfunction at exactly the right moment. Small things, mostly little interventions that could be explained away by people who wanted to explain them away. But too many of them, too perfectly timed to actually be coincidence, and I saw how believers would learn to recognize these interventions as answers to prayer. They'd start to expect miracles, basically, not big, flashy miracles necessarily, though sometimes those happen too, but quiet, everyday miracles that kept them alive and fed and safe. A door that should have been locked turning out to be open. A person who should have turned them in deciding not to for reasons they couldn't quite explain. Food appearing when they'd run out. Medicine showing up when someone was sick. All of it answers to prayer. All of it God's provision for His faithful ones. The prayers were also creating protection around children. Jesus showed me parents who refused the mark for their kids were obviously terrified about what would happen to them, how they'd survive, whether they'd made the right choice. But the prayers of these parents, the prayers of communities lifting up these unmarked children, were forming actual shields. I could see them in the vision, barriers of light that the enemy's forces couldn't penetrate. Not physical barriers, obviously, but spiritual ones that translated into physical protection. Kids who should have been found weren't found. Kids who should have gotten sick stayed healthy. Kids who should have been taken away stayed with their families. It wasn't perfect protection. Jesus made that clear. Some believers would suffer. Some would be caught. Some would face things that looked like God hadn't protected them at all. But even in those cases, He showed me how their suffering served a purpose, how their faithfulness in the midst of persecution would plant seeds in the hearts of those who witnessed it, how their courage would strengthen other believers, how their prayers, even as they suffered, would continue to have power. Nothing was wasted. Every bit of faithfulness, every moment of suffering endured for His sake, counted for something in ways that rippled outward beyond what anyone could measure. Then Jesus showed me something that surprised me more than anything else I'd seen. He showed me people within the system itself, people who'd taken the mark or who were working for the global authorities, who were starting to question what they were doing. Not everyone who took the mark did it willingly, He explained. Some were forced, some were deceived, some were desperate. And while the mark did harden hearts, while it did make it harder to perceive spiritual truth, it wasn't instantaneous. There was a window, sometimes months, where people could still feel the wrongness of what they'd become part of, could still question, could still have moments of clarity where they saw the system for what it really was. These people couldn't be saved in the eternal sense. Jesus made that clear. Once the mark was taken, that choice was permanent. There was no going back from it, no repentance that could undo it. But they could still choose to help others, could still act with whatever remained of their conscience, could still do small acts of resistance that would help the unmarked survive. And some of them would. Some of them would use their positions within the system to provide information, to look the other way at critical moments, to sabotage efforts to hunt down believers. They couldn't save themselves. but they could help save others. I saw a woman who worked in the food distribution system, who'd taken the mark early on because she was told it was necessary for her job, who was starting to realize what she'd done. She couldn't undo it, couldn't take back that choice, but she could and did falsify records, making it look like certain shipments had gone to approved locations when really they'd been diverted to underground communities of believers. She was putting herself at risk doing it, and she knew it wouldn't change her own eternal fate, but she did it anyway because whatever was left of her conscience demanded it. And there were others like her, people who'd taken the mark but were using whatever power or access they had to help those who hadn't. Not many, Jesus showed me. Most people who took the mark got fully absorbed into the system pretty quickly, lost whatever hesitation or doubt they'd initially felt, but some didn't. Some retained enough of their humanity, enough of their ability to see truth, to act against the system they were part of. These people were going to be crucial for the survival of many believers. Jesus explained they were part of his provision, part of how he'd protect his people, even from within the enemy's own ranks. It was strange seeing that strange understanding that God could use even people who'd made the wrong eternal choice. People who were damned basically to accomplish his purposes and protect his faithful ones. But it made sense too, in a way. Nothing was outside his sovereignty. Nothing was beyond his ability to work for good. Even the worst decisions people made, even the most tragic choices, could be woven into his larger plan in ways that served his purposes. The vision shifted again, and I was seeing families making the choice about the mark, not in some distant future, but soon. Very soon, maybe weeks from now, maybe months, but soon. The system was already being implemented. Jesus showed me the infrastructure was in place. The technology existed. The global authorities were just waiting for the right moment, the right crisis, probably to make it mandatory. And when that happened, every family would have to decide. I saw parents agonizing over it, saw the fear in their eyes as they considered what refusing would mean for their children. No food, no medicine, no education, no future in any conventional sense. How do you choose that for your kids? How do you tell them they have to suffer because of a spiritual truth they might not even fully understand yet? But I also saw the parents who made that choice anyway, who decided that their children's eternal souls were more important than their temporal comfort, who believed God would provide even when they couldn't see how, who trusted that a life of hardship with Jesus was better than a life of comfort without him. These families were going to become the backbone of the resistance. Jesus showed me not resistance in a political or military sense, but spiritual resistance. They were going to be the ones who kept faith alive when everything in the world said to give up, who kept worshipping when worship was forbidden, who kept believing when belief seemed pointless. Their children were going to grow up with a faith that had been tested in fire, a faith that wasn't based on prosperity or ease, but on genuine relationship with God, and that faith was going to be unshakable. I saw one family in particular, parents with 3 young kids, making the decision to refuse the mark. The kids didn't fully understand what it meant. The youngest asked why they couldn't just do what everyone else was doing, why they had to be different. And the father knelt down and explained as best he could that following Jesus sometimes meant being different, meant being willing to suffer, meant choosing the harder path because it was the right path, The kid didn't really get it, I don't think. But the father's faith, the mother's faith was strong enough to carry them all. And Jesus showed me that this family would survive, would be provided for, would see miracle after miracle that would eventually build unshakable faith even in the kids. Then I felt myself being pulled back, felt that same sensation of returning to my body that I'd felt at the end of the other visions. But Jesus had more to say. He spoke quickly, urgently, like time was running out. Tell them that preparation starts now. He said, not physical preparation, though wisdom says to prepare practically too, but spiritual preparation. Building faith now before the testing comes. Learning to hear my voice now before the noise gets so loud it's hard to distinguish. Forming communities now before it's dangerous to do so. Don't wait until the crisis hits to get serious about your relationship with me. Don't wait until the pressure is unbearable to decide where you stand. I woke up gasping in my office. Paramedics surrounding me, their faces showing relief and confusion because I'd been gone for almost 20 minutes. My chest hurt. Everything hurt actually, but what hurt more was being back, being pulled away from that clarity, that presence, that understanding of how things really worked. They rushed me to the hospital, ran tests, kept me for observation. The doctor said I was lucky, said it was a miracle I survived. They had no idea. Everything Jesus showed me is still vivid in my mind, clear as anything I've experienced in physical reality. Maybe clearer honestly, and I know why I came back, know what I'm supposed to do with what I saw. The message isn't complicated. The times ahead are going to test every believer's faith in ways we can't imagine right now. The mark is coming, probably sooner than most people think, and the choice about whether to accept it will determine not just how we live, but where we spend eternity. But here's what I need you to understand, what Jesus made absolutely clear to me. God will provide for those who trust Him completely, not always in ways that make sense, not always comfortably, but He will provide. The believers who refuse the mark won't be abandoned. They'll face hardship, real hardship, but they'll also experience God's presence and provision in ways that comfortable Christians never do. Their faith will be tested and proven genuine. Their prayers will have power that moves mountains. Their witness will plant seeds in the hardest hearts. If you're watching this, if you've made it this far, then maybe God brought you here for a reason. Maybe you needed to hear that the choice ahead isn't actually that complicated. Even though it'll feel impossible when you're facing it, you're not choosing between comfort and suffering. You're choosing between temporary ease and eternal life, between trusting the systems of this world or trusting the God who created you and loves you and has never abandoned His people. Start preparing now, not just physically, though wisdom says to do that too, but spiritually. Build your faith while you still can. Learn to hear God's voice in the quiet. Form real relationships with other believers who will stand with you when things get hard. Study the Bible like your life depends on it, because it does. Pray not just when you need something, but as a way of staying connected to the only source of real power and provision. The communities I saw surviving without the mark, they weren't special people. They weren't super Christians with extraordinary faith. They were ordinary believers who'd made a decision ahead of time about where their loyalty lay. who'd settled in their hearts that following Jesus mattered more than anything this world could offer or threaten, and when the moment came to choose, they'd already chosen. The rest was just following through on a decision their hearts had already made. I don't know how much time we have before this becomes everyone's reality. Weeks, maybe months, not long. The infrastructure is already in place. Jesus showed me that clearly. The technology exists. The global systems are ready. They're just waiting for the right crisis, the right moment of fear when people will beg for the solution they're offering. And when that moment comes, millions will accept the mark without even understanding what they're doing, because it'll seem practical, necessary, the obvious choice for anyone who wants to survive. Don't be one of them. Decide now, before the pressure hits, that no convenience is worth your soul. No comfort is worth eternal separation from God. No threat is scary enough to make you betray the one who died for you. Make that choice now in your heart. So when the moment comes, you'll know what to do, and if you're scared, that's okay. Everyone I saw in those visions was scared too. Fear is natural, but perfect love casts out fear, and God's love for His people is perfect. He won't let you face anything you can't handle with His help. He'll give you strength when you need it, provision when you need it, peace that doesn't make sense given your circumstances. All you have to do is trust Him. Actually, trust Him, not just say you trust Him. There's a difference, and the times ahead will reveal which one is real in each of our hearts. Thank you from the depths of our hearts for walking with us until the very end of this testimony. If you're still here, it's because something has stirred your soul in a way only God can. Now we ask you to take one small step that can create a ripple of grace. Write a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We want to lift your nation up in prayer. If you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel and tap the notification bell so you won't miss the messages and revelations we share every day. And above all, share this video with at least 3 people you care about. Your loved ones, your friends, your brothers and sisters in Christ. Because one act of sharing can awaken a heart, restore faith, and draw a soul back to the light of God. May His peace surround you, His truth guide you, and His love never leave you.